I'm Nicola Clark. I'm one of the subject specialists for Pearson for GCSE, particularly for post-16 maths. And my intention for this session is to give you an overview of key useful resources for post-16 teaching and assessment from Pearson specifically, but dipping in and out, showing you where things are. There's a wealth there, and it's just finding it and hopefully pointing you in the right direction so that you can make full use of what's there, which should save you valuable time and give you more scope to focus on things that you need to do in class without searching for resources, because we can help. So as a general starting point, I've split the resources into planning support, teaching support and assessment support, just so that I could keep it in some kind of order. There's lots of crossover, there's lots of interleaving, there's lots of places where you might take an assessment resource and use it in teaching, and so on, and you might use some of the things that I reference in planning in class as well. So if the document, which is now available to you, has hyperlinks to all of these, so this should be quite easy to find. The first thing I'd recommend you do, if you haven't already, is register with Emporium. That's available to all teachers with an academic email address, so it's free. There are update emails on a regular basis when Graham uploads new resources or papers from previous sessions. Emails come out keeping you updated of those, so that's a really helpful service. This is the opening page to the Emporium, and we're focusing on GCSE Maths. So we'll just let that go through, and file 11 is the new 9:1 GCSE here, so that's the linear version. So within all of the things here, we now have a post-16 selection file cabinet specifically, and we're going to look at the post-16 resources document in detail today, and as I say, we'll kind of flick in and out of that. So that's open here. So in terms of planning, we've got schemes of work, we've got printable ones, sort of editable Word documents, and we also have access, you have free access to an interactive scheme of work through ActiveLearn. ActiveLearn is Pearson's subscription service with a wealth of resources, but you can access the scheme of work and some bits and pieces for free just by registering, but it's a bit of a taster as well. The interactive scheme of work I can show you now. Again, that's just a free register, and I've got one here. That this is just an overview, but you can the great thing about this, you can have this for however long, you can adjust the timings, and you can move units around, and what it does, which is quite clever, is it'll flag if you move something around. It'll tell you if you've missed an underpinning topic, so that's quite helpful. That's particularly helpful when everybody's starting from scratch, but in terms of post-16, it might act as quite a good reminder of topics. There's lists here. You might want to go back over number, division before you do your fractions and your ratios, for example. And it's just really, it's very full of useful information. We've got some key topics that come up time and time again in post-16 that we need to keep covering. So such as fractions and percentages, the subunits are here. your references, all the different things that might come up, a bit more information on prior knowledge. So there's loads of information in there, and bits that you can pick out and use, and bits subunits, and it just goes on. So that's really helpful in terms of, it's quite dynamic, and it's you're able to share that as well. We've got schemes of work, as I say, that are editable as documents. Some of us still prefer on paper, and we've got, this is all in Emporium, different lengths. There's a post-16 one here, different lengths. Some colleges and post-16 providers are moving to a 2-year scheme of work, so that, 2-year course before the resit. So that's quite useful to have a look at as well, in terms of getting everything covered. But the 1 year was developed with the post-16 in mind, focusing on the application of some of the skills that students have come with and need to build on. We've also developed, in terms of post-16, we've got a Making a Start guide. This is again in Emporium in the post-16 selection. So that's there's a document there with guidance, and sort of that this is for people that are specifically new to Pearson, but there's still some quite excellent guidance in there, referring to again more of the resources that we have, and we have tied up with that a set of resources to go with the Making a Start. We've got also, back up to the scheme of work, there is a set of worksheets for the scheme of work. These again are in with support materials within the GCSE. And these are classroom resources. They're levelled. Post-16 would tend to focus on foundation. That seems to be where the bulk of our learners are targeting. And these are worksheets. If we look at foundation, perimeter, area and volume. So within this, it does say worksheets. It's not always worksheets. I'm just going to, there we are. So you've got here some tarsiers and code breakers. The code breakers are super. That's the answers. The learners have to work through and match their things. So they're from Just Maths, but they're again freely available. Tarsiers you're probably all quite familiar with, but again, this saves you writing them each time you need them for the end of a topic. They're not pieced together as they need solving, which means that learners can cut them up without seeing all of the answers before they start. So that's just really helpful. So there's plenty there at the, just to get you started. But they match up with the scheme of work topics as we've just looked at. In terms of planning, the examiner reports are one of the things that I think we're all really pushed for time, and I say it regularly. If you only get time to read one thing, I think the examiner reports are really helpful after an exam session. So because they highlight strengths and weaknesses, they look at overall responses, they list common errors, which we can hopefully help learners to avoid making. They also come with and are available with exemplars. So that again, it's published after each series. within Emporium for the GCSEs, there are examiner reports and exemplars here. So you get to see a range of possible solutions, different methods, and feedback on each one. So that, again, with the common errors, the examiner feedback can highlight really well things to avoid, where learners struggled. So those are really helpful. There's a lot of research now as well in terms of teaching and learning, where giving model answers, modelling solutions is really helpful for learners in terms of reducing cognitive load. So being able to offer those models again without you working through it beforehand, those are available there to highlight, and they're in a PDF document. We can have a look at last summer's. So, and this is the exemplars with the comments. So they're here, and then there is actual student responses given and highlighted, and the feedback given. So they're really helpful, and they're quite useful to students when they've seen sort of real people's writing, you know, rather than just the typed input. We've also, there's a selection of actual lesson plans with selected topic areas. So these cover sort of the selection that I've got here: area and perimeter, 2D shapes, percentages, Pythagoras and trigonometry. Trig we need to address now at foundation, so that will always come in helpful, and it's certainly still requested as a revision topic for research students. Percentages is one of the topics that has been highlighted as a weakness in post-16 research. So alongside metric conversions, fractions, is percentages. So these are quite good in terms of planning for early teaching, I would say. When students come to you in October, September, October, and you're trying to avoid too much diagnostic testing at that point, we know these are weaker areas, so they're really good starting points, I would suggest. And down here we've got some, there's your percentages is at the bottom here. The document with all the links is in the post-16 folder, so it's available. You won't have to remember all of this, and you won't have to look it back up. These links will take you to them. So we've got here some exemplification, so it extends the knowledge, sort of specifics from the scheme of work, prior learning, highlights of, you know, where we definitely need to do a bit of focus. So there's, again, if you need something quite specific and quite detailed and ready to go, there's pages. This is 39-page document, so there's all of the background, topic tests, which I'll talk a bit more about later. Those are included for that. There's some extracts, and then some detailed assessment objective information. And we'll talk a little bit about bronze, silver and gold in a moment as well, in terms of problem solving. So it's all applied here. So those are really helpful in terms of, you know, we know we need to look at percentages, so that's quite detailed and freely available. I've got a link here to a recent piece of government research on retention and success in maths and English, which was specifically looking at post-16. So that's really helpful. That link in particular isn't to the full research document, it's to a practitioner guide that was compiled from the research. So it's real hands-on, punchy. These are ways that we can support learners at this point. These are tried and tested methods, texting, and being, contact and things like that. There's a bit of advice for what's been successful just before assessment time in terms of contacting learners and trying to make sure they're in time for the exams. So this that's your full that's the full document, and then there is where is it? I think it's here. That's the guide there. So that's the practitioner guide. So that's a little bit small. And again, this is quite, you can have a poster up. Just, we know about creating sense of belonging, but it's just about developing skills, reminding that the prompting is particularly helpful. And it's quite reassuring, and it was just quite useful in terms of practical advice rather than the research element of it being that detailed. That was more the highlights and the practical takeaway from the research. So that was really helpful. The other massively useful piece of planning support that we can do from Pearson is that Results Plus is now available for the information is available for your learners from their previous centres. So when you get your learners in September, we used to have to do quite a lot of diagnostic assessment, trying to find the gaps, trying to develop skills maps, trying to plan for individuals. But we knew often that it was quite not ideal to bring learners in and start testing. Particularly they've had the summer off. So Results Plus now, certainly for Pearson, with permission from the learners, you are able to import their scores from the summer exams previously. You can group that into your classes, and you'll have a detailed skills map for the groups that you're actually teaching. The link on this particular document is to the training video to be able to access those results. And how to do that, it will involve some input and support from your exams department, but it's about putting it into classes, analysing certain questions, but it means that right from the get-go, right from enrolment forward, you can start looking at groups and as much of your cohort as you can pull together, so that you can plan effectively to make best use of your time. Again, we know we're short of time, and we know that that if we can focus on the weaknesses, we're going to make better use of that. There's also, again, within this, there's some ideas for using the interactive scheme of work in some detail. So yeah, that's a great resource. That's going to be really, really helpful in terms of planning. So yeah, provided they sat Pearson at their previous centre, you do have access to that without them. It's not just your current centre. You can find their previous marks and feedback. So that's really helpful. The other thing to mention at that point is Pearson's access to script service. So that's also invaluable. In terms of students being able to see their own scripts. They find that that can be quite probably might sound to them a little bit intimidating, but actually I think on the whole learners do find it quite inspiring to see what they did well, where they picked those marks up that they do have, and where they thought they'd got stuff wrong and they have picked marks up, or they thought they had stuff right and haven't. It's a very real thing, that's their handwriting. That's not just a sheet of figures or marks from their tests. So some of you might have used that certainly perhaps for the November resit, that no, that was available. So if you've used that already and you've got thoughts or ideas about that, do feel free to let us know in the feedback. But it's something that Pearson has sort of pioneered, and it just really is quite invaluable in terms of what we can take out of that. That's really useful. So on to teaching. So actual teaching resources for use in the classroom. Again, with the Making a Start guide and the post-16 cabinet that we've got in Emporium, there are a pack of resources in there already, which has some really good card sorts in it, covering the topics, as I say, thinking particularly about metric conversions, percentages, fractions as some key areas. There are, within that folder, this opens, there we go, a bunch of card sorts. I'm particularly fond myself of the measure conversions. These just need printing out. They can be double-sided because that's not good. This one multiplied by 100, but the flip side of those when they're cut up is divide by 100. And they really make learners think. I've used these with adults and kids, and it just makes everybody think about what they're doing. These aren't set up in terms of they're paired up, so they do need to be pre-cut before you take them into a lesson, would be my suggestion. But it does go through by the thousands as well, but not just kilometres to metres. There's some really nice twists to this, and often we get through half of it and have to go back and have another look, because the obvious ones might need a little bit more thinking about. So they're super. A bit card match in terms of research backed collaborative learning, interactive learning, and low stakes learning. We talk a bit about card matches I'm particularly fond of because it's moving things around. Learners aren't committing things to paper and getting anxious about it. They've got something quite tangible. They can do it in pairs. They can have some discussion. And as I say, some of these, it's not necessarily the first one, and they might get something right, but need to think about it a bit more or rearrange at the end. And it's different values as well. They're not all wholes, so it does require quite a lot of thought and application. So that's one of my favourites. There's some other card sorts and ideas, different methods that you might be familiar with. Your learners might be more familiar with. So these are all freely available on the Emporium within that post-16 cabinet. So yeah, there's some designing, some extensions. They're just really useful, practical, and tailored to the post-16 areas that we know we need to focus on. So those are really helpful. There's formulae posters on the website. Those they say posters, but obviously you can print those any size. I've certainly worked with learners where we've had a folder or a book, and that's one of the places they've kept one of those, just an A4 or an A5 version, and they can annotate that and add to it as they go. So that's there's a link to that for Emporium as well. Top 10 toughest, these are super. These are free downloadable booklets highlighting the top 10 toughest questions or areas from previous papers. We've got these, again, the link is in this document. These are for the summer 2018 foundation and higher, and then there's the 2017 versions underneath there. We haven't got them for November at the moment, And there are science and English ones, I think, as well. But that's so the foundation and the way that these work. I'd say I'll focus on the foundation because that's the bulk of our learners at post 16. It's the top 10 toughest questions as found by the statistics when Graham did the digging around. So it gives common errors. It breaks down exactly where the mark scheme is applied. There's some examiner feedback. There's how to get the second mark. There's some examples of how to do it. Possibly, a better, different ways of coming up with a solution. And there's some practice on those specifics. So as I say, they're just, I think they're super. They just exemplify. You get worked examples, you get that examiner feedback all in one place. So for the foundation, they're just a really good resource. So you can give the links to your learners, or you can use bits of them as you wish, as you're covering topics as well. If you've got if you've done powers and you want to just use these as backups for that, that's a really good use of those. So they're really helpful. There'll be another one along in the summer, and they can be used in the classroom, but they can also be referred to for learners to look at outside as well. There's some exemplification work here. So these, again, within here, we'll show you some student answers. Again, you can demonstrate to learners specifically. Where's it going? It is. Again, some more of the feedback. This is from the specimens as well. So again, worked answers from learners and what the marks were. So those are really helpful in terms of showing. I think what the learners find quite helpful is where what the examiners are thinking as well. So so that's the exemplification. We've got also, you'll be quite familiar with crossover questions. Crossover questions are really helpful, particularly at post 16, because when Graham looked at we separated out some of the post 16 learners within the cohorts, and the crossover questions, the post 16 learners do very well on the first sort of half of the paper, first 60% of the foundation paper, but they do need to pick up marks further on. And that's these questions. It's the crossover questions that we really need to encourage our learners to be picking marks up on. So, but rather than a whole paper, it's just those. So that just helps you time-wise. You can fit quite a lot into a lesson that way, rather than run a whole paper and not have time to do as much with it. As a kind of alternative to that, or as an opposite to that, Graham has also combined foundation and higher papers into a single tier test, and just with one set of crossover questions in the middle. So they're very long. They're kind of 2 3/4 hours. They're much longer, but so very difficult to run in a lesson. But they just might be quite helpful. I've included them here because I thought they might be quite helpful in terms of picking out where learners could have a think about where they would be picking up those marks, knowing that they have to be able to pick them up from the end of the paper, as not just the beginning, in order to get that 4 or 5. snuck in another link here for worked solutions for past papers. Again, if you use past papers as mocks or regular assessment, we'll talk about it a little bit more in a moment. The worked solutions are really helpful, again, for learners to follow through as they're making corrections, depending on how you work that, but that's something that's also available. These are for the whole paper, so November 18, 1F, there'll be a paper with handwritten answers in they're from Just Maths, and they do say obviously a lot of those questions will have more than one method available, but this will just show one method, whatever the person who's written it has done, that's what's shown, but there will be alternatives. So they're there. Again, you haven't got to do that in your spare time to take into class. That's all there. That's the point here, is saving you that time. And then for assessment, again, one of my favourite things is that students are aware of how the mark schemes are applied. And we have two versions of the mark scheme. So there's the one that the examiners have used that's quite straightforward and quite cut and dried, but there have been student-friendly ones written. So, and these are particularly good for there's some past papers here I'll just show you. So again, from Emporium, if we look at November 17, and then we've got a student-friendly mark scheme here. So the difference is that this kind of explains the thinking. The examiner's version doesn't so much. So these, you might find them useful for yourself. So this gives quite detailed on how the mark codes are given. And then these are all quite straightforward because these are the first few questions. But as we move on, they give you what the examiner might expect to see, what they might see, and what each individual mark is given for, and where they're broken down. So they've referenced the M's and P's and A's. They're not used throughout, but you might find them really helpful. I think if learners can see where exactly the thinking behind, I think that really helps them in terms of what they put into their working and what they show. We know we need to see more working than we often do. It's an ongoing issue. So that's, yeah, so there's processes to find and then a correct answer. That's your accuracy mark. So what they also do, I think, in my opinion, is they enable you to reduce your marking workload. Learners can mark each other's, or they can mark their own in class using these as well. Because they're quite detailed, it makes them more confident about giving those part marks to each other. And then what that gives you time for is to fill in the question level analysis worksheet spreadsheets. So each paper within Emporium here, for example, has question level analysis here, and what that is it's a big spreadsheet. I'm just going to show you in case you haven't seen them, where you enter each student's marks per question. They're pre-populated in terms of the questions. Let's see if we can open this. Yeah. So it's pre-populated in terms of each individual question and its parts. This is the specification information, and then you can each learner, and you can enter the scores. Now, again, I always thought that was quite time consuming, but actually once the marking's done, it doesn't take very long to do, and it's really, really helpful in terms of where students are picking up marks and where they're not. Because one of the things that we found, we expect the GCSE papers to kind of ramp and the harder questions to be at the end, but sometimes it just doesn't work like that. You'll find that there'll be a question towards the end where there might be a tree diagram, and it's quite procedural, and it's quite, you know, learners are quite good at it. They're very good at the frequency trees as well. So, you know, probabilities. And it doesn't matter how late in the paper that is, if they have to do a little bit of working out, they tend to do quite well on it. So that would be, you'd see that on a spreadsheet like this. So you can just run them for your individual groups. And that helps you teach diagnostically where those gaps are. You can go in and teach, and it will also help you not go over again the things that everybody's doing really well. We don't have time to dwell on things that actually turns out they're all quite good at. So that really helps that side of things, but it will also help you individualize. You can highlight your figures. You can obviously make your spreadsheet do whatever you want it to afterwards. If you want it to flag anything where you learners scored below 50% on a question, that's really easy to do. So that's available for all of the past papers and mocks, and as far as I can remember, all the practice papers as well. So it's just as an ongoing thing, they're really helpful. This has got all of the different papers along the bottom as well. So they're all in one sheet you can keep for your classes. So those are really helpful. So as I say, that if you can get the learners to do the marking, you've got more time to input onto the question level analysis, which is really helpful for you. Shadow papers, if you haven't seen these, shadow papers are written after each series. Graham goes in and writes a shadow paper where he changes the names and he changes the numbers, but the questions in essence are the same topics, the same number of marks and the same levels. So what that means is that they cannot recognise necessarily Hannah and her sweets, for example, which they've heard about on social media. This is different enough that they might not make that connection. And in that sense, it feels much more unseen. So they're worth, you could use them as mocks and then save the papers that were actually sat, the live papers, as correction papers, or, you know, subsequent papers. But shadow papers is just massively useful, and it's another whole set. It's for each level and each paper. So those are great. They also are particularly useful for showing sort of target improvement. If you've taken either a shadow or the real paper, and you've got a bunch of results you've got for each learner, and then they do the alternative. So if they do the live papers, they get a bunch of results. They take the shadow paper later after they've done some work on the weaker areas. You've got a direct comparison to show them then. The QLA forms are the same for both, which means that there are grade boundaries available on the shadow papers as well, because they're technically the same paper. But as I say, they feel unseen, so they're really, really helpful. So yeah, they're very clear on progress made in terms of showing progression and improvement. So they're super for that. Full sets of mock papers. Pearson have now written 4, and you can use Results Plus for those to obtain sort of rich analysis of your learners' performance, and that does, I think, as far as I'm aware, enables them to compare with other people as well. But yeah, you get that'll do your question level analysis once you've put your results into those spreadsheets. We've also got specific topic tests here. So once you've finished a bunch of lessons on particular topics, there's a content list here, and then from that you can highlight which which unit you need. If you've done fractions and percentages, we'll just go to unit 4. There'll be a topic test, which will just saves you time, saves you even creating them in Exam Wizard. Somebody's already done that for you. And they're specific to levels that, again, higher are available, but the general thrust here is for foundation. We've got practice tests. Practice tests, again, I think there's 7 sets here of full three papers at each level, so plenty there. But there's also, they've been split into 6 40-mark tests, and the thing about the 40-mark tests is obviously they fit much better into a lesson. They halve your time taken and they halve your marking time as well, but they can be worked. Again, get your learners to mark them. They've been created from lots of different questions from past papers from the legacy, and then they do involve the new spec as well. So and then there's analysis grids for each one with some sort of level guidance, because they have the questions have been trialled before. Those are really, that information is all there. In terms of other information that's available, so those are all sort of GCSE, they're specific to the specification. I've also highlighted the Edexcel Awards in number and measure. These are shorter, they're an hour long. They have a calculator and a non-calculator element, and they cover, the topics that we need to know for, we know that are vital for post 16, so they can be used during topics. They're also, they are available as qualifications in their own right. The linked pair pilot applications were also excellent. There are chapters. There's free textbook chapters for this, which were really useful for teaching. I think that's, so there's textbook chapters. There's the textbook bits, but there's chapters here on some of the crossover topics and they're quite detailed. There's quite a lot there that you can make use of. Again, we're all pushed for resources, but this is freely available, and you can just you can direct learners to that. If you've got access to PCs in class, they can have a look at that. They've got some specification information. They've got some worked examples, and then there's practice as well. So that's all there also. So in terms of sort of teaching and learning, there's quite a lot of research about assessment and the nature that it needs to be ongoing. Although I didn't, I've referred to not starting your September with endless testing. It's the ongoing nature of assessment that is what strengthens the retrieval process for learners. I've got some research recently. I've seen that learners with weekly quizzes do better in end tests than learners that are only quizzed once a term, for example. So that's quite interesting. Obviously, it depends on your timetabling, whether you see them once a week, twice a week. But so the more ongoing that we can do, the better. So I have also dug around a little bit. One of the ways that I do review regularly is that I start my sessions with 10 questions, and ideally 1 or 2 of those will be about the previous lesson, because soon, recent review is obviously key to getting stuff into longer term memory, which frees up working memory. But the 10 questions is also really useful for 2 things. One, for repeatedly highlighting topics that you perhaps haven't gone over so much, because learners are okay with them. We know we need to focus on the weaknesses, but we do need to keep the strengths fresh as well. So the 10 questions is really good for that. You can keep harking back to, can you remember this formula? It's also really, really good for automating things like metric conversion. So once you've, used some resources and done some revision on those and some directed learning, it means that you can start each session with what's 5 kilometers in meters, or, make those conversions quite snappy and quite quick. Percentage conversions are also, as I say, highlighted for post 16. We can start doing those, making them much more automatic. They know they're going to get asked one each time they walk into the room, and that's the sort of the repeated inquiries will help them retrieve that information much quicker. The other thing I can show you here, we've got a link that will highlight. I have a colleague called Pietro who does the pre-16 subject specialism. He's got a presentation here with a lot of resources in it, but one of the things that it has is about 50, I think, foundation warm-up 10 questions that are timed. So you just put it up, it times itself, it moves on. So you just, they just work through that. Again, in terms of assessment, that time pressure is crucial. Learners need to be able to deal with that, and so the more practice they get at that, the better. And then the other thing that those questions do, because they cover the whole range of content, is that they will flag up to you any topics that actually you might not have thought of or haven't shown themselves in an assessment so far, but will be evident that learners might need to look at those again. And the way that I use those is I will have those. I'm just wondering if I've got them up. They're here. So the way that I use those is we'll put them up. It's not going to show me. And then I choose 4 of them to go through with learners. If when I've got some feedback, which ones do you want to go through? These are great as well, because half of them are calculator and half of them are non-calculator. Other places for those kinds of questions, we've got Craig Barton's diagnostic questions. So those are quite helpful in terms of keeping other things fresh and highlighting and where they need to be. I've tagged Exam Wizard on the bottom here, but the topic tests will save you hours of time in terms of looking for specific questions about topics. You can combine those. They're all I think they're Word documents, so they're you can combine a couple if they are. So you can combine a couple if you've not done one for a week or so. You can print them out, use them for homeworks. But they're there. This stuff is here, so it's just about saving you from doing it again. In terms of educational and cognitive research, the other, I don't know where it is now. The other big issue that we talk about a lot is the problem-solving elements. And Pearson have written some sort of gold, silver, and bronze papers. So these are mostly the assessment objective 3, so they refer to problem-solving, but they do come with certain levels of scaffold. Again, research says that appropriate scaffolding is really productive for learners. Bronze, for example, will show you most scaffolding. So you get problem-solving question and it'll show you the steps or direct learners to the steps that they might find helpful. So in terms of this, it'll be, here's your 3 child tickets, here's your 3 childs plus an adult, and then do the comparison. With the silver, there's a little bit less, and then the gold questions are exactly as they appeared in the exam. And the real benefits of those are that if you can give a bit more scaffolding to start with, and learners start succeeding in those questions that they thought they couldn't do before, that success, that achievement will improve their motivation. There's a big link between achievement and motivation. We're not sure which way around that really goes, and it may very well be that thinking about achievement, improving achievement, and allowing that achievement to happen when kids are coming to you that feel like they've failed. This is how we boost that back up again. So used carefully and progressively, they just allow learners to just pick up what they're doing, and hopefully develop the ability to scaffold for themselves. Problem solving in itself it doesn't really stand alone. It's very much based on a solid knowledge of the skills and that are required. So this supports those skills developing, and there'll be a range of different questions in there. So but the questions are broken down much more for the bronze than they will be for the gold, for example. So, and that just enables you to differentiate within your lessons, within your learners, and it might be within topics. Learners will still have favourite topics, and they may need less scaffolding for some of those than they do for others. And they're also useful for guided practice. As much practice as possible in class is really helpful. They need that support, and it's really important that we can see where they're struggling in order to unpick mistakes and how we boost it and improve it for future. So yeah, there's also I feel like I've focused quite a lot on assessment, but again, that regular assessment, as I said, from quizzes to regular review, students do better with more assessment. It does seem to impact on their results quite positively. We might think it's overkill, so used judiciously, it is a good way of making the retrieval process smooth, and consolidates previous learning as well. So we've got here. So yeah, so the gold, silver, bronze, I think, are really useful. And that's that's my summary of the resources that we've got in here and ways that I would use them and have used them in class. That's the linear, that's the GCSE Mathematics file cabinet, and there's quite a lot of information there that should save you valuable time, really, allowing you to focus on your classes.